This afternoon, I am in Houston speaking with Jon S Schultz, who is Professor of Law Emeritus and the retired Director of the Young Quinn Law Library at the University of Houston. Jon, you were at the university from 1975, according to my notes, until you retired as Director in 2002, and as Professor you retired about 3 years later in 2005.
I think that's true.
Sounds accurate.
It's pretty close.
Well, that's good. After all those years, one loses track of time, or at least I think I do on occasion.
It's easy not to count.
Yeah, people sometimes ask me the year I retired, and I have to think a little bit because it's been, 13, 14 years back.
I really do.
just almost like yours.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are those who say I retired a little bit before I really retired, but
Well, that may be truer than you think of a lot of us, but we won't go there today. Okay. Jon, it's our custom to actually begin by sort of getting a picture of you as a person as opposed to just a colleague. Not that they're really any different, but you get the picture, I think. Could you tell us a little bit about your life, perhaps not only today, but even when you were younger?
Sure. I grew up in Nebraska,
Uh-huh.
in the middle of Nebraska, and I had a brother who was the smart one. He became a surgeon, and I went to law school, and from law school I ended up in this business. The main thing I did in this life, I think, is marry my wife.
Uh-huh. Well, that's not a bad accomplishment.
For me, it really worked out. Suzette is my wife of 50 years,
Uh-huh.
and we met in Denver.
Oh.
Suzette is an architect. She had her own architecture firm, which developed out of one of the major interior architecture firms in the country, and they happened to specialize in law firms.
Oh.
And so that was very lucky for us because in about 1990, we bought the Houston office of that firm, and she was CEO and president of that until she retired. And so we had two careers that were kind of parallel. That is, I was the law librarian and she was the law firm designer. And as it worked out, the final book that I ever wrote, I wrote with Suzette, and it was the ABA's guide to designing a law firm. And so the two of us have had the wonderful opportunity of writing a book together, but it's quite sometimes stressful, but it's a lot of fun to merge the two careers and really get to have some fun with it.
Did she retire about the same time you did as a faculty member? Or?
Yes, about the same time. She moved out of the actually, it's the tallest building in Houston, and moved to one of the shortest buildings on the island in Galveston. So we had her offices in Galveston, and we were doing some commuting when we needed to come to Houston. So I commuted to the law school, and we were living in Galveston when that flood hit.
Okay.
So,
we'll talk about that a little bit
We
later.
will.
I think you're talking about the one, well, there were two floods now that you mention it. One while you were in Galveston that caused havoc to where you were living.
yes.
Maybe that's the one you're mentioning.
Well, there
I'm
was.
focusing on the one that caused havoc to where you used to work at the university.
Of course.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, actually.
Great.
Yeah.
We have two sons.
Uh-huh.
We have two grandchildren.
Oh, that's nice.
And It's really nice for us.
Are they either the sons and their families around here, or do you
Actually,
travel?
one is in Austin and the other one is a couple of miles away.
Oh, well, even Austin is what, 3-4 hours by
Yeah,
car?
Austin is nice, and that's my older son. He's married to a Baylor professor,
Uh-huh.
and the other son is here. He has a great career in the family, and they're the nearby ones, so we get to see our grandchildren.
Now, you say that your one son who lives in the Austin area, his spouse is a professor at Baylor. Is that up in Waco where the campus is, or do
It
they have
is.
a branch in Austin?
It is. So we've got some commuters here.
So it's a bit of a trip.
Sure.
Yeah.
It sure is.
Well, you were commuting for a while then from Galveston to Houston.
We were.
And that's about 50 miles each way, as I recall.
It is, but to the university, it's only about 40 miles.
Yeah, that's right. The university is out sort of on the, we called it the Gulf Freeway in my day.
And we still
may
do.
still be called that.
Yes, and long before either of us were there, it was under construction, and it still is.
No. Well, I have enjoyed driving the highways here in this town now on 2 of these trips in the last, this one and one about a year ago. And you've got a few new, very wide and wonderful freeways and some toll roads too that we didn't have in my day.
Things get a little better. Yes.
Yeah, well, my day was almost 50 years ago when I was here. Yeah. John, it's sort of our custom to sort of follow up on you as a person by asking another question about interests, hobbies, special things you might do, especially now that you're retired. Do you have any such activities besides spoiling grandchildren?
Absolutely. Being married to Suzette, I have picked up a little bit of architecture and architectural drawing and building. And when I was at work at the University of Houston, and actually everywhere before that, I picked up a little bit of that, and so I like building things.
I think many of us in our field have had some dealings with architects or planning library redesigns or even new libraries, so it sounds like you've had your dose of that.
Yes, and that was a part that I really liked. Also, there have been lots of other things. I've been a cowboy.
A cowboy?
I was. Once at a law school auction, I made I guess it was a mistake, of bidding on a bull. And it was a bull calf. It was nice.
Sounds like you must have won with your bid.
I did, and the way it worked out, they came up to me after the law school auction and said, "Oh my God, we forgot to auction off the bull." And I said, "Don't worry, I'll cover it." And so I did, and I have a place in Central Texas, and took it out there, and then eventually we added a few cows, and we had a small cow-calf operation. And it was a lot of fun. Because
well, I assume you got part of your investment back, if not all of it,
part
selling
of it,
the offspring of that bull.
Yes, and that was fun. So it was fun to be a Texas cowboy.
Well, I guess that's a real, I don't know if you qualify as a rancher with only one bull to start with, but that's where they must all start, with just a few.
That's right. You start with a ranch, but with ours, we found it was much easier to have somebody else grow hay on the property. So we are now farmers instead of ranchers.
Okay. Well.
But it's still fun to go there.
So this is West Texas someplace?
This is a town with a wonderful name. It's called North Zolch, Texas. And it's pretty close to College Station.
So it's more east of the
yes, it's east of West Texas.
Yeah.
But pretty much straight north from here.
Uh-huh. Wouldn't be terribly far then, I guess.
No, it's less than 100 miles, and
Yeah.
we don't go there very often, but it would be nice to have a little place there, so
Uh-huh.
that's something
Sounds like
we'll look forward to that.
you and your wife enjoy some activities that none of us had known about until we divulged them here in front of the camera today.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we do lots of things like that we enjoy. Fishing, for example. I'm a nut for that, and we have a place down on the island in Galveston where I can step out the door and be fishing in a few steps.
Oh.
So that's one of the nice
Sounds
things
like
about
you
being retired.
adapted very well to life here in the Gulf Coast area of Texas, here in Houston.
Yeah, but it's
All these various activities, raising
it's a great place. It's
bulls
a great place.
and
Yeah.
cows and fishing off the
Right.
beach and boats down there in Galveston. And it's a pretty good life.
It is a good life.
Yeah.
We do good things when we can, and sometimes we do things like our Salvation Army work. Every month we buy a dinner for about 100 people down in Galveston, go down, serve it, prepare it, buy all the food, and that's kind of a nice thing to do.
I imagine that can sort of give you a nice feeling because you benefit so many people with those meals, I'm sure.
We've been in a service business ourselves. And
That's right.
And this is one place where everybody always says thanks.
Uh-huh.
And it's fun. That makes it nice.
Yeah. Well, getting back to your other service business, being a law librarian, you had to qualify for that. And I know you have 3 degrees. John, could you tell us what they are and where you got each?
Sure. I have a BA from the University of Nebraska at Kearney, and that was very close to my home. So, in the middle of winter, I would trudge 5 blocks uphill and downhill, and it was uphill both ways. And so that was really the hardship, I guess, of the cold weather in Nebraska. It was only 5 blocks, what a deal. A nice little state university within walking distance of my house. So actually, my major there was French, and I had an English major also, but I thought that I might become a French teacher at one point, and that was blown out of the water when I figured I would do a little better as a lawyer. So so now I use it because we occasionally spend a summer in France.
Okay.
And took care of that one.
The French are notorious for pretending they can't understand English, I've been told. Yeah, some of them.
It's true.
You go to a lot
I
of
see that
countries over
occasionally.
there, and a lot of people speak English, but
They do, and
I think
we
in
do
France
well.
it's a matter of national pride not to do that too openly, if at all.
Yeah, we see a lot of appreciation when we do it.
Uh-huh.
So we have a great time when we go
Yeah.
over there.
Well, that sounds interesting. So you have your undergraduate degree in French and English, I guess.
Right.
Did you have the other two? Could you
Well,
tell us-
of course, there's the law degree from the University of Denver,
Okay.
and met my wife in Denver, and learned how to ski in Denver, and both of those things were probably not the best thing for law school grades, but they sure made it an enjoyable thing. So we were married when I was in Denver, and my law librarian there was a fellow named Al Squillanti.
Oh, yes. It's University of
Was
Denver,
Virginia?
actually, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, he was at Denver.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was Rick Searle's predecessor.
Yes.
Yeah, because Al went off to Ohio Northern
That's it.
and
yes.
became dean.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know after that what he did, so.
Well, he's one fellow who has been one of my mentors, and I know we're going to talk about
Yep.
mentors.
That's my
in a
next
little bit,
question. We can just start along the way.
That's great because Al had this wonderful article that he'd written for Law Library Journal entitled something like What the Dean and Faculty Should Know About Their Law Library.
Uh-huh.
And that told me an awful lot about this profession. And he said something like, there are fewer than 100 people with the 2 degrees, law and library degree, by count. And so these people are rare, they're valuable, and they're wonderful. And I was impressed by that. And I thought, well, I'm really not that far away. And so I talked with him on graduation, and I wasn't doing too well at finding a job. And he said, John, this is a good racket. And I tended to believe it. So in talking a little bit more, he said, there's really one place where you should go to learn all this. And of course, he was referring to Marion's program in Seattle. And I said, yeah, but I'm broke. To travel there is going to be kind of tough, and without an income. And so I got a scholarship to the library school at Denver.
Okay.
And we rented an apartment, and we were really excited because that was what I was going to do. And then the job came through in Oregon State University, and I had this possibility of a huge salary of $8,000 a year, or
Fairly princely sum in those days.
It was a princely sum in those days. Yeah. And so I grabbed that in a New York Minute and wrote the people at University of Denver Library School saying thank you very much, but I'm going to be doing this other thing. And so we went off to Oregon State University in Corvallis as soon as we got married, and that was a great place for 3 years, and I learned an awful lot and learned a little bit about academics and what is expected of wanting academics. And I was teaching in a business school, and in business schools there are about, I think, maybe 5 terminal degrees. Degrees that make you eligible for tenure. And so, they had the DBA and the PhD and the education doctor and the JD and whatever the other one is that I forgot to mention. And so I was all set in a tenure track position, but it was also true that each one of the people who had one of these degrees, knew that the other 4 doctorates were worthless. And so I had a great time in a tiny law faculty of 3 lawyers and 1 part-time lawyer, and it was a very nice experience. And I got a little bit tired of messing around in a business school, because I had no business being in a business school anyway, knowing nothing about business.
Yeah, that's right. You didn't major in business coming up, you said.
I did not. They didn't have a slot for French
and English.
So I recalled what Al Scolati had said, and got in touch with Marion Gallagher. And by the time I went up and talked with her, I was making a little bit more money, and I said, Marion, do you think that if I go to this position that I can come out making $11,000 or better? And she looked me up and down as she would do when she's ready to make one of these wise pronouncements, and she said, "I think so." And
Well, that was obviously the right answer, I guess.
that was That was really it, and
Yeah.
so we knew we were going to be able to handle this, and so we went to the program, had a great time there. Of course, went to Art Charpentier's shop for the apprenticeship, and I guess the rest was history.
So you went to Yale to do your field work?
I did, field work, yes, and wow, what an education there.
Yeah, well, he was a master too.
He was indeed.
Yeah.
And, he was I think the only guy who had run a major practitioner's library and an academic library.
Yeah, he was the Association of the Bar of the City of New York for
Which
many
is
years.
a wonderful library itself.
Yes.
And so between that experience and the doors that Marion opened for me when we were in class and out of class and at meetings and everywhere, I really met an awful lot of people and learned an awful lot of things, and can't tell you how much I appreciate that education.
Well, it sounds like you did pretty well with your 3 degrees. They were a little bit spaced out. And I gather Escalante had a great deal to do with sort of recruiting you into the field. I think you've already said
I'd
he had a role.
say single-handedly he
Yeah.
did.
Was there anybody else, or did it sort of?
Well, getting me into the field was one thing, and then there was the matter of having mentors.
Yeah.
And, my God, they were falling out of the walls. They were everywhere. What profession to be in.
Yeah. So you would count Al, and you'd count Marion, and Art, I assume, as mentors.
Right, and you know, that's what we did back then. That is, we didn't say last names.
Yes.
You know,
That's right.
we would, everybody knew who Julius was.
Yeah.
Everybody knew who Roy was.
Yeah.
Everybody knew Marion. You know,
That's right.
Irwin, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Erwin Surrency, Julius Mark, Roy
Right.
Mirsky.
Right? Irv Pollock.
Luminaries.
Yep.
Irv Pollock. Yeah.
And so the 100 people with those 2 degrees turned out to be really remarkable people.
Well, at least most of them. I'm not sure I put myself in that category. Well,
You
this is the
were
foolish part.
you were one of my idols at one point. So
When you were still young.
yeah,
and
right.
naive,
When I didn't realize that we were the same age.
Oh, well. I could have been worse. I could have been younger. So, well, you finally get your 3 academic degrees, your you know, the things you have to become a real law librarian with the proper degrees to be a double degree, as we used to call them. I think we forgot the undergraduate degree in the double degree business. And then you went, from some notes I had, to Indiana, the University of Indiana. Should you talk a little bit about that job, how you ended up there, and the sorts of things you did, and even if you taught or anything while you were there.
Sure. We threw our stuff in the Mustang convertible. It was yellow. We drove across campus, or across the country rather, with a basset hound. We ended up there and had just a wonderful experience. What can I say? Well, I really learned how to be a librarian there. Florence McMaster was the director, and I was her assistant, and we had a new building. And I had offices in the old building and then in the new building, but getting from the one to the next, I really learned a lot. And what I learned was, I guess, a lot of logistical things that were possible, and what was necessary to go from one building to another. And that was one of the nice things that I picked up there. But what probably affected my career most in going to Indianapolis was that there were a couple of guys there that I connected with who really affected the rest of my life. And that would be Jim White and Chuck Kelso. Jim White was with the ABA, Chuck Kelso AALS, but Jim White kind of took me under his wing and got me started going on inspections, on law school accreditation inspections. And that was wonderful, and it ended up that I did close to 40 of those inspections before I was through, and there were
quite a number. I mean,
it is quite a number, and for that I thank him, because he kind of called on me because I was in the next office over. Whenever he was having trouble finding a law librarian to go on a visit.
Well, he knew what he was going to get, which was probably a very fine report, and that was what he really needed.
Well, each one of those did generate a report.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the reports really had a lot of effect. Back in those days, Jim White could come knocking on any university president's door and not have to wait 5 minutes because he was such an important guy.
Yeah, I mean, he was the American Bar Association consultant on
He
legal
was.
education, and essentially responsible for approvals of law schools.
Yes.
Without which your students wouldn't be able to take the bar most places.
And so
That's clout.
yes, that is clout.
Yeah.
And until we got this consent decree from a federal court that said we had to back off a little bit, it was possible to really make changes in law schools where they were necessary.
Yeah.
And there were more necessary changes back when it was...
Well, I remember throughout both of our careers, I mean, the impact of Jim White's leadership from his perspective and the improvement of law schools across the board was just fantastic to watch and be part of, I thought.
I'm glad to see somebody else expressing that, because...
I mean, there were facilities often in the early days that were really unsuited to the use. They were overcrowded. We didn't have faculty. I mean, they were off practicing law and not working with students and doing anything else, some of them. And he put a lot of pressure on places to remedy a whole variety of problems, including those two things.
He did, and the younger you were, the younger the law school you got to investigate, or the more problematic maybe.
Yeah, maybe
so I got a bunch of them that were that had some trouble, but if you did that, you got a reward of going to one of the lovely places where they had done it.
How things ought to be, huh?
Exactly. But it's true, we did find some places where, well, I guess an example I could give without naming names. I walked in, and as you may remember, it was necessary to have a certain number of seats in your law library.
Yes.
And at this school, it was kind of odd, because all of the chairs in the library were folding chairs, and they had the name of a mortuary on the back of them.
Oh.
And so we had a feeling that this was a bit temporary.
Possibly that law school was in the east.
Actually, no, it's not, but it might have been.
But it could have been one like that.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, it has become a perfectly reputable law school.
Well, so has what evolved from the school in Delaware way back in those days.
Yes,
That
yes.
had a leader allegedly playing a little fast and loose with the rules.
That has been done, and so having an effect on that is one of the nice things that came from being in Indianapolis and working with a good bunch of people there.
Well, you were there for, looked like about 2 years, 1970 through about
70,
72.
71, 72, yeah, it was
Yeah.
a couple of years, but...
Then you went to South Carolina as
I
director and assistant professor?
Uh-huh. Actually, I went as associate professor
Associate
because
professor.
I had been doing some of the things you're supposed to do, and you know, it's
Well, if
people.
you're going around inspecting law schools, before you were a director, you were sort of on the cutting edge of that too, a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
Most of the
that was
people
just
Tim used
that was my
were-
luck.
Yeah.
That was my really good
Or
luck.
bad luck, because he was down the hall and knew where you were,
Yeah.
and that you did the job right.
Yes, but the preparation that I got, you know, from the Gallagher program was just. It was, as she said, it may not have much effect on you in the long term, but for the first couple or 3 years, you will be ahead of your contemporaries.
Yeah. Well,
Totally true.
I think that was actually true in that day, because she had been teaching those courses for quite a few years at that time, and her predecessor had actually started the program back in the late 1930s, Arthur Beardsley.
I didn't know he had
Yeah, he started it, and then it sort of, like everything, kind of went on in a hiatus during World War II, and then started to come back. But by then, Marion was had succeeded it, and that's why she sort of restarted the program in about the late 1940s. And you and I came along a few years later. It was well established before we got there.
Yes, yes, I think it was, here we are in 2016, and it was 75 years ago that Pearl Harbor happened.
That's right.
And when that happened, my folks carried me out of church, having had me baptized that morning, and found out that the world had changed.
Oh, what a...
So it was kind of a...
You can always remember your baptismal day for some
I
reason, huh?
can, yes.
Yes. Well, so you end up down at South Carolina as the head librarian, or director, as we would call them later. Or probably it was still law librarian. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your experiences there? I imagine Jim White still knew how to get a hold of you.
He did, and I was always grateful to get out and see other places. This was a Southeastern Conference school. It looked to me like a good place to be for my first directorship. So I was very happy to be there. And on top of that, they had a new building. And so I got to put the finishing touches on the building.
You seem to be a master at showing up after the building has been put together, and you just have to finish it up a bit.
Yeah, but you know, it's necessary to be able to go through the programming stages and all the stages, and
Yeah.
especially if you're expecting that a flood will wipe out your whole operation. So it turned out to be a good thing anyway in South Carolina, and I didn't teach much at South Carolina, but I worked on getting my promotion to full professor, and that meant, you know, putting out a couple of books and things like that. And I had a lot of fun there.
You were there about 3 years, weren't you?
Yes, I was, and I learned how to talk Southern a little bit, you know, and instead of saying good morning, as I met somebody else walking across campus, I'd say morning. And
You all get worked into
Yeah,
your vocabulary too.
right. And then it started coming natural, and people would remind me that I picked up a bit of an accent, but it was a great opportunity because at that time, Sewell Brumby at Georgia had received $1 million to upgrade the University of Georgia Law Library collection. And so it was appropriate for me to say to my administration, hey, look, you know, the guys next door, the competitors over here have done something that no other law library has done. They've put $1 million into their law library, and don't you think we ought to try something like that? So it gave me an opportunity to kind of do a little arguing and lobbying and working on some of these things that apparently deans and librarians do.
Yeah. Can I dare ask if you got much of that, if any of that money?
You know,
all of it?
we got all of it, but it was, but it may have been good because it was parceled out over 3 years.
Okay.
So they said, yeah,
You
we'll
had
give you
time
$1
to
million,
sensibly
but
spend it.
yeah, and so that was good, and it was also good because we had the new building that we were trying to fill full of books, and as you know, it is really easy to add a lot of volume count when you add a set of national reporters.
Yeah. I think in about those days it was like 6,800 or something for
It's
one
something,
set.
yeah.
I remember the number from
Yes.
planning for those things years ago, about that time.
Yeah, I had a West representative who came into my office one day, and he said, how'd you like to go for a ride in the third floor Buick? Well, it was, we had filled our third floor with another set of National Reporter System, and he was able to buy a
So he
Buick,
got a Buick on his commission.
with the commission. So I
Yeah.
thought it was great. But, some of the West and some of the representatives were pretty wise people.
Yeah. Well, I know the West representative here in Houston during the era when we were stocking the University of Houston's new facility. He had a Cadillac, so maybe your guy wasn't doing quite so well.
Well, let me see. We may be talking about the same one. I do remember a guy who once told me he would bet me that he could solve any problem using CJS, Corpus Juris Secundum. And he said he sold a ton of those sets by offering to solve any problem for any research problem for a lawyer if they would promise to buy his set. And he had 2 Cadillacs. So
Could have been.
So it may have been the same.
Apparently knew his
same
business.
fella, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. So you were at South Carolina for about 3 years. You got yourself up the ladder academically in terms of rank, and then you came west from there to here in Houston and became the law library director at the University of Houston. Now you were succeeding Lolly Gasso.
I was succeeding Lolly. Nobody actually ever succeeded Lolly.
You had at that time still a fairly new building, but it proved a few years later to be somewhat difficult to keep the water out.
Oh, that building, yes, yes. We had one of the teaching units, though,
which
was new.
That's right, you added the second of the...
Yes.
They were going to originally have 5 teaching units.
I think so.
5 semi-autonomous law schools, I think, was the original plan, sharing this big research library. And some other centralized facilities, sort of like a university of law schools.
Yes, it's quite a plan.
Yeah.
And if the demand for lawyers had continued, that might have been a pretty good way to handle it.
Well, each unit was designed for, as I recall, about 500 students.
It was,
So
yes.
it would be 2,500. It'd be one of the very largest law schools in the country
That's
if
right.
that had happened.
And it had a magnificent study carrel for each student.
Yes.
It had faculty libraries. It had satellite libraries for students.
Yeah.
And here we were in the golden age of law librarianship, because very soon we had 7 law libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And so I became the magnificent, omnipotent
Yeah.
leader of University of Houston law libraries.
That's right.
And then it changed.
Well, the university had been a relatively modestly funded private institution until about 12 or 14 years before that, when its trustees essentially gave it to the state of Texas, who accepted it in return for the state of Texas picking up the tab of running the place. And boy, the transformation over that period was unbelievable, I thought, because I was there for 3 of those years.
You saw some of that I never did. So
Yeah, and the older buildings, then the new ones going up, and it was just, including the beginnings of that law center during that period.
And that sort of thing is what attracted me to the university. And at that time, Houston grew and grew and grew, and it was in the process of becoming the 4th largest city in the nation.
Yes.
And it was doing things like putting in the Galleria, putting in the Astrodome, and there was so much going on in Houston that, why wouldn't Al Coco go there? Why wouldn't Lolly love to be there?
Yeah.
I sure loved it. And
It was
just
a
a great...
fun city.
Yes.
Very dynamic, and as you say, the 3 years I was here, the entire downtown silhouette of the skyscrapers all changed because all these new buildings went up.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, it was quite an exciting place to live in those days, and it was the home of the space program.
The space program.
During when the moon landings were occurring thereabouts, and the final parts of the astronaut work. So that made it even more sort of exciting, I always thought.
Absolutely, and it was fun to do recruiting out of Houston. Because there was so much to show people.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about your first major part of your career at the University of Houston, and then we'll sort of talk about what sort of happened towards the end in terms of the huge flood you had, courtesy of a passing tropical storm. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes.
Yeah. Because you did a lot before the waters
we
came.
had a good time, and of course, because you've been at the University of Houston, it is wonderful if you can have a good time doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the people that we've talked about, I know had a great time there. Al had a great time there. Lolly had a great time there. Albert had a great time there.
Albert Brecht.
Brecht.
Yeah, he was a student there, a law student.
Right. Rick Searles also.
Rick was a law student before I went up to become a law librarian.
And Pat Kehoe.
Well, Pat Kehoe came as a law librarian.
But it was a great place to come to.
Yeah.
And you didn't mind asking for things because there was a chance of getting them. And I think Al Coco did an awful lot of that sort of thing, of visualizing what could be.
There was a lot of really innovative thinking that went into that whole concept, and I don't know who had what portion of parts in it, but the idea of putting your largest single investment, a huge research library, and making it available for up to 5 semi-autonomous law schools, I don't think anyone else has ever tried that, let alone thought
No.
about it.
I looked for it, and I'll tell you, I never saw anything like
Yeah.
it. And one of the main proponents of that was a fellow named John Mixon,
Mm-hmm.
who has asked
Been
me.
on the faculty for many years, and I
Yes.
guess is now retired.
He's now retired, but
And
not too
written a
long
book
ago.
on the subject of that law school, autobiography of a
Of a law school. You're right. You're right. And,
Yeah, I was given a copy a year ago when I visited there to interview a couple of our colleagues. And I went home, I was going to start reading just the part about when I was there. And I read that first.
Uh-huh.
And then I thought, well, I'll sneak back. I liked what I read. So I started at the beginning and ended up reading the whole book. It was absolutely
It
fascinating.
was fun, yes. And John has asked me about you too, by the way,
Thank you.
before this project. I mean,
Yeah.
anyway, it's been fun.
So you were there from
75.
75 until 93 or thereabouts as librarian.
Yeah, I was there for a long time.
Yeah.
Longer. Matter of fact, over the history of the law school, the law center, I was an administrator for longer than anybody, by far. Don't know whether that means I let the grass grow under my feet or what.
Oh, I hope not. I think administrators have a lot more than that going on.
They do, but
Yeah.
it takes a little bit of skill to try and keep up too.
Well, why don't we talk now specifically about an experience that you unfortunately had to have there that few of us have had anything like it. I mean, maybe somebody will have a fire in a library that'll destroy a lot of things. Your case, it was a water that came in through the underground utility tunnel system on the campus, but it originated from a tropical storm that had hit the city. And I remember even when that building was built, because I was here at the time, we were concerned that the library, in order to eventually have sort of a plaza at the surface, ground level, with the schools around it, the 5 schools and administration unit, was built 2 floors underground. And in Houston, the water table is, shall we say, high to say the very least, and your elevation above sea level, not very much. So, with that little bit of introduction, can you tell us a little bit about that and how you and the others there had to deal with it?
Yeah, it was a mistake, no doubt about it. And they knew it was a mistake when they started building it because, from what I heard, the water level was only maybe that far below the slab. And it would rise and then fall, and that's just no good.
Yeah.
I suppose you could say it started with a phone call. The dean woke me up, said, "Hey, your library's filling full of water, and we can't do anything about it." And of course, that was the message everyone was getting. The whole university, the whole city, it was just amazing. There was a bayou nearby, which means river,
Yeah.
and it flooded, it overflowed into one end of campus, filled the hotel parking lot, which was an underground building, and then followed the utility tunnels all the way across campus to our library.
So they think it actually got into the system under the Hilton Hotel?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it may have gotten in more places than just that.
Yeah.
But the Hilton Hotel was certainly located closest to the bayou. And
So it was actually a surface flood of the bayou that was over on that side of campus that apparently was the source of
apparently so.
the water itself, other than the storm, which was the source of what was in the bayou.
And it was such an occasion that nobody ever really thought seriously about it. No one expected it to be that bad.
Yeah.
But then we had freeways that were full bank to bank, and I mean a freeway that's down way below the banks. So we had deep rivers and semis hidden underwater and that kind of thing. It was an amazing thing to deal with, and one thing I gotta say is that while I was in the Gallagher program, we took a look at something that had happened, and that was at Temple University.
It was a fire.
Yeah, it was the fire, and I'm sorry, I remember the guy's name so closely.
Sorensen.
Erwin Sorensen.
That's where he was
Yes.
before he went down to Georgia.
Yes, and Erwin Sorensen visited us at Seattle once,
Uh-huh.
and he was an interesting person because he had been through a fire that was just a real shocker.
Yeah.
Not a little fire, because little fires happen in libraries all the time. Little
Yeah.
floods happen in libraries all the time. But Irwin's fire wiped out an awful lot of that collection.
It did, yeah. And what the fire didn't get, the fire hose water did.
Yes, it was a no-win situation, and so for some reason I remembered that, and in the back of my mind I thought to myself, well, if I should ever be faced with that, particularly knowing what this building's like, maybe I better have an idea what I'm going to do. And so that stayed with me for just forever.
Now, did you actually put together a formal disaster plan?
Especially afterwards.
Well, I mean, we were all doing them afterwards. I mean, our campus, I
Yes.
was mandated to figure out what we were going to do if something major had happened to that collection.
Yeah, and so there were lots of things that were done retrospectively, and matter of fact, I had a library, or I had a website called The Master of Disaster, where I had samples of, but just the same. What you do helps, the planning that you do helps, but every disaster is different.
Yeah.
And so you really don't know what's going to hit you. But anyway, knowing that something could happen should make you do a little bit, but we didn't do enough.
No.
And so the phone call came, and I had to get down, and nobody else could make it in, and it was an amazing sight to see the water up to floor level when you look down at the floor below.
Yeah. So there were two underground floors, as I recall.